Discover how smarter project insights can lead to better project outcomes.
Hello, project people. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Project Chatter podcast. It's always good to have you with us, and it's been a while since I've been with us. And I want to say, Dale, how are you, my friend? I hear you had a great event last week with the EVA 26 and our Mr. Charismatic Steve Wake. How was the event last week?
Yeah, I'm well, thanks, Val. Glad to have you back as well. EVA 26 was amazing to be at, to talk to guests live in person. Wow, what a treat. And I know you've got some ideas lined up in Oz as well with some events there. So the folks can look out for that. But yeah, Steve's great. Big shout out to him as well. Puts on an amazing event every year. Real thought leadership coming out of his sessions, and we were hugely entertained. We had musicians, poets, everything. So it was fantastic.
Wow, that's fantastic. Folks, you can check that out. It is on YouTube. And Dale did a great job actually being live and physically present. How weird is that to say? Look, let's introduce our guest, our veteran guest. He's been here before. He knows the routine. Mr. Dan Patterson, how are you, sir?
Doing very, very well. Thank you very much for having me back on the show. I know last time I was recovering from COVID, so I felt like I was with you in digital body, but perhaps not so much in mind last time. So I'm glad to say I'm back.
We're glad to have you back, and I'm glad you recovered and everyone's safe and well. And look, you've got a pretty interesting topic today, but you've been scheming away, because I remember last time you left a little bit of teaser for the audience and you talked about a few things, but didn't give too much away, and you went away. What have you been doing since we last saw you?
Yeah, so last time we sort of flirted the concept of continuing to push the boundaries and the goodness of project planning, which, as you guys know, that's my thing. It's been my thing for the last quarter of a century. I really don't know if planning ever got banished, I'd be completely unemployable, because it's the only thing I've ever done and will probably ever do. But so yeah, we've been working on a few concepts, and I think as part of that, Val, doing a little bit of almost like self-reflection on the goodness and also the shortcomings of what we've brought to the table to date in terms of helping the science of project planning. And, I think I've had a few realizations, and probably the most important one has been, so our focus has very much being geared towards improving scheduling. So, project forecasting or project management, project forecasting, and then the subdomain of that is looking at forecasting time. And I think what I've realized in recent weeks or months is that forecasting time or improving our ability to forecast time is great, but I think we've done ourselves a little bit of a disservice with the tools, in that they're very one-dimensional. So yes, we've got these great scheduling tools now. We've got these great cost estimating tools. There's a lot of change control tools, quality management, so on and so forth. But they still very much operate in silo. And I think we've tried to tackle the problem of better forecasting projects. We've been tackling it in a one-dimensional manner, rather than looking at it as a more sort of holistic solution. So with that got me looking into a concept known as wicked problems, which I know we're going to spend quite a bit of time on today. So I'm not sure if I gave you a proper answer there or articulated that very well, but we're looking at broadening the concept of project success cannot just be seen as on time, on budget, and or to quality. The triple constraint concept, I think it's more than that. And also I think even if you do look at it as just simply the triple constraint, those three constraints very rarely correlate. In fact, in many instances, they actually compete against each other. So, I would even pose the question or challenge the fact that, can we really achieve project success? Maybe there is no such thing as a definitive win on a CapEx project.
100%. And no, that was a great recap, because I do remember we kind of went down the slippery slope of, whether the critical path method last time was actually, articulated or useful enough to use in projects, and whether the constraint actually was useful. And I agree with you. I think it's a balancing formula. If you're late, you need to, do something, and it generally costs more. Or if you have your costs under control, generally you spread out your time. There's a balancing formula there. It's more of an equalizer rather than an achieve all, which I've always been confused by it as well. It seemed like a strange formula. It probably wouldn't pass the maths test if you're good at maths. But I'm not saying I am. And I think as well, I love the title and the language that you've put in, wicked problems. And we've had a few people talk about wicked problems on the podcast in different contexts, of course, Dan. But what do you mean? What is a wicked problem from your perspective?
Yeah, sure. So, wicked problems, I think, were coined back in the 1970s. A couple of gentlemen, Rittel and Weber, I believe, and they came up with various characteristics. And I've got my own sort of take on wicked problems, but sort of the formal definition is a problem that is perhaps ill-defined, that there's an ambiguous nature to the problem. Often they're very complicated. I think more importantly, they have competing objectives. For me, I think it's very simple. A wicked problem is something that cannot definitively be solved. And with that, perhaps doesn't necessarily have a single outcome. Take a really simple problem. You have a leaky pipe. You can go to the hardware store, grab whatever you need, come home, you fix the leaky pipe. The pipe is fixed. It is definitive. Conversely, something like solving world hunger is something that there isn't a definitive end. There isn't a definitive stop. This might be an odd example, but take a broken human relationship. You can improve a relationship, but there isn't really the concept of this relationship is 100% fixed. There's always room for improvement. There isn't like an end goal that you cross and you go, boom, I've done it, fixed relationship. So, this concept of improving a situation or a state, and we'll relay that back to projects and project management, I think, in a few minutes, but the concept of improving and making better rather than pretending there is a definitive goal or means to get over the finish line. Another way of looking at it is there isn't a right or wrong. There's just there's a better, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it resonates with me. I don't know if Dale, you remember we talked to Dave Snowden and his Kinefin framework, and he does talk about simple, complex, and wicked problems. And wicked being a little bit more intangible, but he doesn't talk about best practices in general. He talks about kind of better and good, and and even maybe novel or emergent as well. There's this kind of market response that if there is a problem, we must fix it. We've kind of got this mechanized way of thinking of things in projects. You're laughing, so you've probably seen the same thing that I'm talking about.
I think it's human nature, right? We like to compartmentalize. Yeah. We like to slice things up, and then we fix them, right? And again, this concept of fixing is very definitive. Well, when we look at something as complicated as a project that has so many different characteristics and personas and stakeholders and external influences, maybe the concept of fixing or winning or completing doesn't actually apply. And again, project management gets a terrible rap for failing to overcome really project failure. The project success is rare, blah blah blah, and maybe we're not as bad as we think we are. Maybe, this concept of, well, I'm going to build a schedule and figure out, 5 years from now, which day I'm going to finish on. Maybe the planning method's wrong. It's utterly ridiculous to expect that a win can only be measured if we finish exactly on that day 5 years from now. And I'm not trying to sort of get us off the hook from a planning perspective. I think it's better defining expectations and bringing together, again, multiple dimensions and not just looking at project completion, either from a time, a cost, a quality perspective. It's coming up with a blended outcome and trying to get as close to that outcome as possible.
Yeah, I agree. It's always great to talk to you, Dan, because I think there's a synergy between the three of us when it comes to how we view projects. And maybe it's because we've been on these podcasts and we've heard so many great minds talk similarly to the way you talk, Dan. And I've been doing some mindfulness lately, Dan, because I've been under a lot of pressure. And one of the things they talk about is reactiveness versus responsiveness. And it's great, actually, because it really does talk about how we deal with problems in the world. And I think for project managers, it's just one of the fastest and largest growing professions and will only get bigger given the size of the projects that we have in the world. You're right. Why do we hold ourselves accountable to a project that's going to finish in, like you said, 5, 10, 15, 20 years? And we get into this break fix mentality, which is a really reactive response to the environment around us. Mm-hmm. And that's really, it can be demoralizing, it can be difficult, it could be hard. And I don't think it has to be that hard. And I believe that point you mentioned around a blended view is really, really great. So can projects be viewed as wicked problems, or are they categorized differently from your perspective? How does that work?
Yeah, so when you, let's take the formal definition of a project, and I'm probably going to misquote, but a unique endeavor with a defined start, finish, blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
So, so is a wicked problem unique? Yes, by definition. Is it complicated? Yes. Ill-defined? Yes. Are there competing objectives? Yes, absolutely. Depending on whether I'm the owner or the contractor, the prime, the sub. Everybody strives for project success, whatever that is, but individually, each of those stakeholders do have slightly differing objectives or biases towards what they're striving for. So yeah, I've come to the realization that categorizing a CapEx project as a wicked problem is an absolute perfect fit. And I think what that then does, if we accept or acknowledge that a project is a wicked problem, we can then start to tackle the project in a slightly different, maybe not necessarily in a different way, but through a different lens. And again, I know we'll get into the details of this, but perhaps start thinking about a multi-dimensional approach to planning. And let's stop thinking about planning and forecasting from a scheduling and a cost perspective in silo, and look at the trade-offs between the two. How willing are we to give up a month's worth of schedule or take on board a month's worth of scheduled delay in return for perhaps a 2% cost saving? Things like that. And again, I think from a tools perspective, we haven't given the industry the wherewithal and the levers to pull and push to consider those alternate scenarios. Again, a wicked problem doesn't have a single outcome, and that's okay. I think this is all about providing tools that then give insight so that we can make informed decisions as to which combination of cost, schedule, time, social benefit, multiple characteristics of a project, rather than just the old way of thinking, well, okay, we've got to come in on time and to budget.
That's great. And I feel like that's like you saying, Dan, watch this space. Something's coming with levers that we can pull, which is intriguing within itself, but we won't read too much into it. Just a couple of comments. It's always great to have you back, as Val says. We had Antonio Nieto Rodriguez on talking about the project economy. And I think it's absolutely necessary that we give the project economy the right levers. And he talks about how we're pivoting away from this operational world that organizations used to find themselves into this project world, and not everyone's capable or adequately skilled and resourced. And so the technology and the tools will absolutely help us get there. And on problems as well, and particularly maybe wicked problems, and the way we talk about how we always want to fix them. I think it was Eddie Obeng that mentioned, Val, about how, every time we find a solution, actually it creates another problem. And then you found this, along your way, creating tools as well, software tools. And so then I wonder if we've now said, okay, a project is a wicked problem, can they be solved?
Okay, so a lot to take in there. I'm going to be as bold as to say, no, I don't think there is the concept of solving a project. I think tame problems, our leaky pipe example, the tame problem can be definitively solved. I think a wicked problem can be tamed and not necessarily solved. So relating that back to projects, yeah, I'm gonna stick my neck out and say I think projects can only be tamed, and I think if we allow ourselves to consider that, that opens the door then for more realistic planning, setting more aligned expectations, agreeing on objectives between multiple stakeholders. And again, I'm not suggesting we don't use definitive modeling methods, CPM, earned value, whatever it is. We can still use those highly mathematical, algorithmic forecasting techniques and tools, but use those in a almost sort of a toolkit of solutions that we're then going to use to better the project. I think of a project, this is when you're going to think I've been drinking, and I haven't, but at the beginning of a project, you've got this asset or this set of goals that you're trying to achieve, but the asset, there is no asset at this point, because you've got to spend time, money, resources, materials to build the thing, to build the asset. So you have this vision and this goal, and really what you're doing in project execution is you're converting, again, time, effort, money, resources, materials, etc., converting that vision into a reality, right? It's almost like a seesaw. And then at the end of the project, you end up with the thing. But the thing becomes a thing at the expense of a certain degree of time, a certain degree of money, and it's within a given quality. So again, I think you can have different combinations of how long it took, how much it took, the quality of the product that you've delivered, and that's okay. It's almost like squeezing a balloon, right? In multiple dimensions, you squeeze one dimension, it pushes out on the other. So I think a project is a wicked problem, and it's very important to upfront define and agree on where would we be comfortable in landing. And again, in years gone by, we've introduced methods like risk analysis that give you arguably a less definitive outcome and more bandwidths. Yes, I'd be comfortable if I could get anywhere from a 50% certainty and a 75% certainty. That gives you a range, and that's okay. It's still a definitive number, but it's giving you a threshold within which you want to land. So if we can come up with those thresholds for all of these characteristics or dimensions, as I think of them, then I think that's got to be better than what we're doing today.
Yeah, absolutely. So just for my benefit, if I recap, you're saying tame problems can be solved, okay? And you're saying wicked problems can only go as far as be tamed, but once they're tamed, they can't be solved beyond that because they started off as a wicked problem. Is that right?
It is. And again, maybe there isn't even the concept of I'm tamed, it's taming, right?
Yeah.
Because
well, let's talk more about that. What is taming?
So for me, taming is improving. It's moving from state A to state B, and that movement is a positive movement, a net positive movement. So at the expense, again, of either time or money, we're doing something and we're changing the state of something. So if we're changing the progress of the asset being built during the project, then we're taming it. If we're de-risking throughout that journey, we're taming it. If we are making the field execution safer, then we're taming it. It's for me, taming is, again, it's movement from state A to state B, but that movement has to result in a positive outcome. And sometimes on a project, there's external influences. People commonly call them, risks, weather, so on and so forth, political risk. Some of those influences are out of our control, but yet we absolutely are in control with regards to how we tame those negative influences. I always go back to, well, okay, your project forecast, whether it's cost or schedule, if everything goes exactly to plan, you will finish as per your crystal ball forecast, right? But we all know real world projects have so many external and internal influences. The chance of that plan being achieved is typically next to zero. So if the chance of it being, in quotes, successful, definitively successful, if the chance of that is very, very low, then taming is increasing the probability of achieving that outcome. But again, it's not just increasing the probability, it's increasing the probability from multiple dimensions.
Yeah. So okay, so there's lots in what you said there as well. So so taming is moving from current state to a better state. And then how do we define a tame problem? How do we identify that the problem is tame and not wicked?
So I think you're sort of turning the what is a wicked problem on its head there, I think. So I think of a tame problem, in my mind, I'm like, well, can I mathematically or physically solve it?
Right.
If a tame problem is, who was the winner in a 100-meter race? Well, put two people in a 100-meter race, one of them is going to run faster than the other one in that race. So that's a physical outcome that is indisputable. Mm-hmm. If I can solve something mathematically, then that is indisputable. So I think I'm answering through analogy rather than through definition. But
no, that makes sense to me. Absolutely, that's great. And then moving to your multidimensional success criteria, I guess that, as we've all experienced on these large mega projects and even some of the smaller ones, depends hugely on, I guess, what that success criteria is, or more importantly, who set that success criteria. And it's typically not one person, it's multiple stakeholders. And so, you have this notion that every single stakeholder in a project wants the project to succeed, right? But if every single stakeholder or most or the majority of stakeholders have different success criteria or expectations of what success looks like, can it then be solved? I guess we're saying, well, no, we can tame it. But I just wonder if you wanted to comment on that point, because it almost feels a little bit contradictory. But is there a way perhaps we can set that success criteria that it aligns? Will we ever get there, or will it always have sort of these pulls in different directions, if that's a right way to try and give it a picture?
Yeah, that was excellent. So you mentioned two words next to each other there, and that was set criteria. And for me, that's the magic sprinkles in sort of solving wicked problems. So you're absolutely right. Any project has multiple stakeholders, and gosh, the phrase project success gets thrown around so loosely. But just take a simplistic owner and contractor relationship. Is the owner more interested in finishing the project early so that they can use that asset during operations to generate revenue, or are they more cost sensitive and they're okay with the project overrunning? Conversely, the contractor is probably more interested in generating profit and building reputation so that you win the next gig, so on and so forth. So their success criteria, there's probably overlap in the Venn diagram, but their motivators and their desired success criteria are very often different. And so, to just say, well, was that project successful, yes or no, I think is such a blanket statement. It starts to become a little questionable. So your comment around setting criteria, what if we, before we get to the planning phase, what if we actually spent more time and diligence, take a step back and say, okay, for the key stakeholders, let's understand your motivators. So we'll get the contractors, the subs, the owners, etc. And if we can all agree, or at least acknowledge each other's objectives and motivators, then I think once we've understood those, the next step is to say, okay, well, given that perhaps, Mr. Owner, you're very sensitive to schedule, whereas the contractor is more sensitive to cost, let's agree on thresholds that we would all be comfortable working within, such that if indeed the project is a month late, but 2% under on budget, everyone is accepting of the fact that's a, again, quote, success, because we've agreed the thresholds and also agreed the correlation between those push pulls as well. So that's really what I was meaning earlier when we were talking about multi-dimensional planning. I'm going to coin the phrase meta planning. It's almost like planning the planning, right? It's a more, meta's by definition is sort of more comprehensive, understanding context. I think we should spend more time planning the planning, figuring out the motivators and the objectives of all of the stakeholders. Then we can figure out, okay, well, are we going to use CPM? Are we going to use such and such? That stuff's easy. But I think this concept of taking a step back and understanding the dimensions that are important from each of the stakeholders. And on this concept of meta planning, I was sitting down the other day and I wrote down the word meta, and I took the characters META, and I actually was able to sort of define what I think would be really valuable steps in this more holistic, multi-dimensional sort of planning approach. So for fear of you guys cutting me off, if you take the M in meta, I think that's all about managing objectives. To your point, right? It's okay. How much emphasis are we going to give to coming in as close as possible to cost versus schedule, et cetera, et cetera. And then if we take the E of meta as establishing thresholds, again, I just don't believe it's realistic to forecast any dimension and say definitively, yes, we're going to land on this, otherwise it's a failure. Would you be happy with, if your planned retirement portfolio came within 5% of your expectation? Of course you would. Well, the same thing should apply to projects. So, if the M is for managing objectives, the E is for establishing thresholds against those objectives. Think of it as goodness. It's like kind of the goodness factor. Once we've done that, then we can start to think about taming. So that's the T in meta. So I had to get the word tame in, of course, right, into meta. So, then we can think about taming the problem. And for me, that's, okay, well, what techniques, what tools are we going to use to actually address and proactively reduce our risk exposure. And then, the A, I've always been a huge fan of continuous improvement and using lessons learned. Again, you're probably going to cut me off here and never have me back, but the whole concept of plan the work and work the plan, I'm sorry, completely rubbish. All the textbooks that talk about that, it's wrong. Planning is a continuous process, even in execution. And replanning is very, very healthy. People think, oh gosh, I've got to replan the project. We must be failing. No, replanning is great. You're just responding to change and hopefully responding in a very proactive manner. So, if we use analyze as the A in meta, and if we can understand, if we analyze how well we're taming the problem, if we're not taming it sufficiently to get within those thresholds that we have in the established thresholds, the E bit, then we replan. And I think that's an incredibly healthy and effective way of marching towards betterness, which goes back to the comment of moving from state A to state B and generating net positive.
Yeah, I love it. I love everything you've said there. And it got me thinking. I was having a conversation earlier today, actually, around, how we look at projects. And I know Val's mentioned before, we should gamify projects. And I was thinking, for me, not the television games or computer games, but for me, sports games. And I was thinking, if you look at provincial sides or state sides and country, maybe that's your supply chain into your main contractor. What's the outcome for the country? What's the country's goals? If it's a football match, whether that's American football or soccer, whether that's a rugby match, is it to win the World Cup, right? And then how do you get your club sides to align to the country's, the national goal? Is everything aligned? Or your suppliers aligned? And then that whole gamification of it, being agile, having different strategies for different scenarios, the fact that perhaps we don't train enough in projects. We execute far more. We spend far more time executing than actually training to execute. So there's a whole piece that comes in there for me, and that also brings in, I guess, the benefits part. So your M in manage objectives for me is not just our classical iron triangle, but also the outcome. What is the outcome? And if we can then get everyone to align to that, so that's your suppliers all the way to your subcontractors, not just your main contractor, to say everyone wins on an outcome-based approach, then I think we're there. And that constant replanning, I'm with you. We don't always have to change our measure, but if we're replanning to deliver better, then that's okay. Maybe we do have to change the measure. If the measure's wrong, absolutely. Getting into the old EVE, PMB world, it's absolutely changed that. But I'm with you there where let's replan. If we find a better way, let's replan. Let's look for those opportunities. But yeah, I don't know if you had a comment on that or not.
Yeah, I'm getting all excited about this. So, I don't know if you saw my eyes lit up when you were talking about gamification and you were talking about the M and the managing objectives. Dale, imagine if we were able to not just articulate those objectives across the various stakeholders, but let's say we had an index for each of those, and then if the stakeholders could agree on the weights of importance, then you could absolutely gamify those weighted indices across those objectives. The weighted indices could all sum up to overall, we'll call it tamification.
There you go.
I'm serious.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, because then I love that, because then what we're doing is we're starting to, again, mathematically model, and humans are great at that, and computers help in the calculation. We're objectively modeling something that is, as we said at the beginning, is not definitive. That becomes really interesting. And not only that, all of the stakeholders up front agree on those weighted objectives, and then they all march towards that. That would be very cool. Tamification. I think I came up with that, not you, for the record.
It's recorded, Dan. It's the Dan Patterson copyright, tamification. Just one more comment before I hand to Val. I was also recently chatting to people, and I've seen this starting to come into play actually around how we actually measure carbon as well in the activities that we have in our schedules. And I had this conversation. I was actually asked by a master's student around how we use earned value management and carbon and net zero. And I said, well, if we can find a way, instead of weighting earned value by cost, weighting it by carbon, then that's a game changer for the environment and outcomes-based benefits and everything. But Val, over to you.
Well, actually, I'm gonna cut you guys off because I think it's brilliant, because again, we've been talking about multiple dimensions and multiple objectives, and I really like the fact you're coining it as outcomes. Why couldn't carbon footprint be one of those project outcomes that we then weight and include it in the tamification index? I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's exactly what we want, Dan. We want you to come here, have a think tank, come up with all these brilliant ideas and save the project world for us, because just sitting back and listening is fantastic. I mean, Dale took some words out of my mouth. I was like, this is bang on. I was at a basketball game last night because I'm a basketball coach. I think having sports as part of your peripheral in project management is important as well. Just for FYI, for the folks listening, I think sports and sports analogies, just anecdotally, are really great and metaphorically in project management. So I watched the Boomers Melbourne versus Adelaide last night. And obviously we're Melbourne fans because we live in Melbourne with my daughters. First quarter down, Adelaide's winning, right? I'm born in Adelaide, so I'm a bit conflicted. I wanted to go for them because they're the underdog, but I was going for Melbourne. Then they had a timeout. Something happened, right? They had the timeout. The coach had them there. We were sitting 2 rows back from them. And I'm still talking to my daughter. I said, what are they saying? He said, well, he's saying do this and do that. He's changing the strategy based on what's happening in the field, on the court. And that response changed the game. By the end of the third quarter, they were ahead by 30 points and they absolutely demolished them. And we all cheered because they are the Boomers. You want to add that?
So isn't that again analogous to that team pivoting's massively overused, but pivoting based on external factors or circumstances, and they're still driving towards taming the problem, but they're perhaps adding extra emphasis by, I don't know, playing in a certain way or using certain players to put them on the field, things like that. They're proactively adjusting to the circumstance. I love it.
100%. But it wasn't reaction because it wasn't something they did on the court that time. It was a gameplay. So they have a playbook. So they said, we're going to play gameplay 5, let's call it. And they knew the sequence of that gameplay. They knew who to pass it, where to stand, where they needed to be on the court in position for the outcome that they knew was going to happen to turn the results the right way. And just a great kind of concept. I just thought that actually makes sense in what you're saying in the meta kind of verse there and the meta planning element of planning for the planning. It's a great idea and a great concept. And I think the other way I was trying to figure out how we do tamification. And usually when you think of taming, I think of a circus and a lion and someone whipping
a lion.
But but I actually think the best one is probably water. If you think from the start of the mountains to the ocean, you can't force water. You really can. You can tame it from a streaming perspective. It's going to go downhill. Where it's going to end up. You can make certain provisions around bends and you can bank certain places and you can put certain enforcements in certain areas to kind of help with the flow, but you can't stop water. And I think that's another good analogy to understand from my perspective how meta planning would make sense and how projects work. Because if you think about projects, we can't stop the project. I've tried, I really have, Dan. I've been in projects and I said, let's just stop. Let's just stop and take a step back, as you said quite rightly. But no one wants to do that because, we're paying for this and it affects the iron triangle when you do that. So
interesting. So flow of water on a project, one thing you can't stop is time. Time marches on, right? Stops for no man. And so if time is that flow, again, earlier we were talking about moving from a state A to a state B and having a net positive. I think, taming a project is all about during that flow, if you like. We can't change the cadence of the flow, but we can change the goodness and the betterness, if you like, during that period of flow. We're getting a bit abstract here, but
philosophical.
yeah, and the reason why is whilst we've been chatting, I've just gone on to GoDaddy. I bought the tamification.com domain. I'm going to use your water flow concept as the logo.
Perfect. I love it.
And yeah, we'll start on funding this afternoon. So
that's good. A GoFundMe page. Perfect. I think it's great. I mean, I think it's fantastic. And look, this is the idea, Dan. It's three guys who love projects to no end, and we talk about it, and we go through the logical levels, and we get into the detail, and we fly back up into the sky. But look, I want to get into the detail again and talk about wicked problems. And I think for people who know you, Dan, in the market and the community of project management and what you've done, particularly in the software and the analysis side of things. You mentioned wicked problems can't be solved, which was something we just talked about, and the tamification of those. But you've kind of been behind a lot of the analytical tools, risk analysis, acumen, basis. How do you contrast the difference? Is it been a learning pivot for you, or is it just they were good for a certain part of project execution, but now we're talking about probably a more wider methodology that is more circumferencing around how projects actually behave?
Sounds like you're politely asking, why have I changed my tune?
I'm trying to say, where are you going with this, Dan?
Yeah. So for the last 20 plus years, we have focused on improving the science of forecasting and scheduling by bringing analytics tools to the table. And those analytics tools have been very definitive, mathematical, call it what you will. But at the end of the day, we've never once been as pretentious as to say, we're out to solve the problem of forecasting or scheduling. We've always stated we're in the business of bettering the science of forecasting. So I think it's valid and appropriate that we continue to build those analytical tools, even if we are considering projects as tameable versus solvable. You can still have definitive analytical tool sets in a wicked problem or a wicked project environment. And again, I think the more dimensions we can bring to the table. 50 years ago, scheduling was literally one dimension, CPM, and then over time, people have considered, well, what about uncertainty? What about risk events? What about scope change? What about taking into account where we are in the project? Early in the project, we don't have definitive bids. We can still come up with a forecast and a cost estimate. So all of these additional layers over time have been added to the science of scheduling, and it's helping. And that's okay. So I think this is just an extension of this thinking and this topic that we're talking through is really just an extension of what we've already been doing.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, that it should evolve. Again, as you said, planning is a process. It doesn't just stop when we start executing and delivering. And same as the methodologies and the way we deal with projects, it continues. We're always trying to make ways better, and bettering is a really good word, actually. I don't see it used much in daily sentences, but maybe I'll use it a bit more now, Dan. Look, the other question I had is around your recent paper on marginal gains, because I think I've actually written a few blogs on this as well. I think it's very interesting, and how this is related to adopting meta for solving wicked problems. If you could go into that, Dan, that'd be interesting too.
Yeah, so bit of an aside really, but outside of project management, I'm an avid runner and cyclist, and in the cycling world, there's been this concept of marginal gains, and again, in very simplistic terms, it's achieving betterness through multiple very small improvements, literally down to the ripeness of fruit that we eat, or the type of cotton used in a cycling jersey. These ridiculously small changes that on their own would be insignificant and almost immeasurable, but when you put them together, you have a very measurable and also consistent and reliable improvement. So, relating marginal gains back to project management, I don't think there is a magical one-stop, a CPM scheduling tool on its own isn't your solution for time scheduling. You need to have multiple prongs of attack. And then that becomes even more important if we embrace, that this concept of multi-dimensions, and we take Dale's great idea of gamifying those different objectives, then multi-pronged attack becomes even more important.
Mm-hmm. And meta's it's such a, I think it's a really widely used word now. It's getting used. Obviously, Facebook's changed their name to Meta. We're talking about metaverses. We're talking about this dimensional language that you're using now, Dan. I mean, I think from a project control. Yeah, sorry, go.
Yeah. It's sort of multi. I mean, it's hard to. It's like more comprehensive. It's multi-dimensional. It's better understanding or awareness of context. That's probably a really good way of defining it. Actually, it's in the world of projects. It's planning with more awareness of context of the environment, context of the stakeholders, context of objectives and outcomes.
Mm-hmm. And I guess, and in the meta world, I mean, metadata has always been a thing, in the project space, or shout out to my doc controller friends, understanding more about the dimensions of what we're trying to pick up. The better metadata you had and the meta understanding of information, the better you could utilize it or retrieve it or recall it or use it as a function or train it. So I think it's actually a really exciting space to be in. And I think, it'd be great to have you on a panel, Dale, with a few other thought leaders who also share the same lines of inquiry. I think there's specifically around wicked problems, but also, you mentioned Dale Eddie Obang around kind of the virtual rooms and the virtual spaces to execute training. And Cube is really fascinating. And I wonder, have you had any discussions about where Meta would sit in the metaverse or the universe?
Honestly, not yet. No, I think it's still very early days in terms of our thinking. So I'm chuckling, by the way, Val, because you mentioned in the intro that you had a poet, I think, in your previous session, and you just said better meta, which was like a bit.
Hey, there's the slogan.
He's the local poet on the podcast.
That's great. So you go back to GoDaddy now. You got your slogan, you got your domain name, tamification, better meta. There we go. With a little river.
We've just got to build the solution now.
That's the easy
part. That's it. It's a Field of Dreams, though. Remember that movie? If you build it, they will come. Something like that. I think that works. But I think this is a really good topic. I think as well the marginal gains piece. Again, I'm a big fan of cycling. You actually look like a cyclist, so it makes total sense, Dan. I could see you on a bike. I'll have to get up there and go for a ride with you. But yeah, I do think that that marginal gain element of just changing a few things and seeing what happens and seeing the improvements and measuring the results and that compound interest you get from just small tweaks.
The compounding. Yep.
Yeah. How do we, and I'm just going on the side tangent there, but how do we apply this? Because this is a really good concept, but how can people take something away from this podcast today, tonight, tomorrow, and apply some of the things that you're talking about, Dan?
Gosh, so I think, take the meta acronym that we walked through, the managing objectives, establishing the thresholds, taming and analyzing, and maybe, against those four pillars, sketch out what you would do on a project to achieve those. And I don't want to do a hard sell on this, but we've got a white paper that we've published on this topic that might help there as well. So I'm more than happy to share that with all the listeners. And we're setting up a forum, almost like a think tank on LinkedIn to get more consensus and input on this topic. Let's see where we take it. I think the reason why I'm so excited is, again, project management and modern software tools for the last 50 years have certainly helped, but would we put up with a GPS navigational system that 25% of the time took us to the wrong place? No, we wouldn't. So we shouldn't put up with similar results in the project space. So we've got to keep pushing the boundaries.
100%. And look, we'd love to be part of the think tank if there is open positions. As you know, we do like to think a lot, or talk as well, actually. And we're usually isolated as well. And it would be a great honor to be part of that. And your mission, I think this is really exciting stuff. But Dale, over to you, mate, for any other questions.
Look, I mean, yeah, I think we've covered a lot of it. And I think that white paper, Dan, will be amazing to have to, continue the information flow. So send us that link and we'll post it in the show notes. But look, we're not going to let you get out of jail free that easily. We've got Fiverr. We did take you through Fiverr last time. 5 quick fire questions.
This is always terrible. This is awful. This is why I dread coming on your sessions.
Just the first thing that comes to mind, Dan. That's all it is. It's 5 quick fire ones. Are you ready?
And how many takes at this? Okay, for the record, this is live. Go.
Question 1: steak, seafood, or salad?
Oh, definitely seafood. Yep, absolutely, without a doubt.
Question 2: what are 3 must-have behaviors you look for in successful project teams?
In project teams, transparency, ability to collaborate, and have the mindset that everything is fixable.
Nice. Question 3: what is one piece of advice for people new to the project profession?
That's easy. Don't be intimidated by old crusty people like me. Again, it goes back to everything. Everything is not only fixable, but even the most complex things, if you break them down into little chunks, are actually very, very simple. Don't be intimidated.
Agreed. Question 4: if you could go back to one moment of your life, what would it be and why?
It would be, well, shit, now we are going to have to time out and redo this one because I've got to think about this. Yeah, you're really putting me on the spot. I think there's been a few moments in my life that have been milestone moments. Well, no, they've been more crossroads moments, if that makes sense. And perhaps being able to take a photograph or somehow digitally snapshot those moments so that I could look back and re-enjoy them, I think would be very, very cool.
Great. Maybe create a Nifty or something out of it, right? Isn't that the latest thing? Anyway, moving on. Question 5. Which superpower would you choose to have for a day and why?
Superpower. Beyond taming mega projects.
Beyond that,
yeah. Does time travel count as a superpower?
Anything you like.
Yeah, I think time travel, but it would be limited in that I would love to be able to, I think it'd be more exciting to travel forwards than backwards, but there'd be a kind of a limiter on my little time travel machine in that I could only be a viewer. I couldn't be an influencer when I got there. So I wouldn't want to get to the future and then bugger it all up kind of thing. So yeah, nice. So time travel.
Nice. I like how you self-governed your superpower. It's amazing.
Tamed himself.
Exactly. You've tamed yourself there, Dan. It's been amazing to have you on.
Time travel, as long as I didn't have to wear like the silly superpower pants and tights and all that good stuff.
Wear the bike lycra. That's it.
Look, it's your superpower. You can wear whatever you like, Dan. But as we said, it's always amazing to have you on the podcast, and thank you for sharing your thoughts. But before we let you go, any final thoughts that you want to leave our listeners with?
No, I mean, as always, first of all, thank you for the invite, and every time I come on your podcast, you guys always make my brain hurt, and I think it's we have the topic, and you always manage to prod and explore in a very constructive way. So I've got even more to think about now at the end of this, and thanks for the product name as well.
You're very, very welcome.
Not a problem.
Val, final thoughts from you?
Oh, look, it's great to have you on board, Dan, and do keep us in touch. We will send out to all the folks listening the white paper, and keep on doing what you do, mate. Well done.
Yeah, likewise. It's always a huge pleasure. So thank you.
Awesome, folks. So there you have it. It is the end of the podcast. But if you like what you've heard, you can help us pay it forward by sharing a link to this episode on your favorite social media platform. A massive thank you once again to our guest, Dr. Dan Patterson, and thank you all for listening. Till next time, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From me and Val, it's bye for now.